morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Good evening from Doha. Welcome. Welcome to Moving Forward, Rebuilding a More Just and Equitable Education Future, a two-day conference organized by WISE and USC Rossier School of Education. My name is Aurelia Moral, and I'm the head of learning ecosystems at WISE, and I'll be the master of ceremony of this event today. Before we start, I would just like to give you some technical tips. So we will be able to follow the event today with the support of sign language interpretation and also through automated caption. And as you may see, we have a chat feature at the bottom of our screen. And even though there will be no dedicated time for Q&A with our keynote speakers, I do encourage everyone to use the chat to post comments and ask questions. We'll do our best to refer to them throughout the event today. After our opening keynotes, there will be 8 options of interactive workshops for everyone to attend, which you'll access with a different link. So please keep the confirmation link to the main session handy. It's a customized, unique link, so you need it to get it back to the main session once the workshops are done. So the workshops will be hands-on activities led by USC Rossier doctoral students with tangible takeaways for all participants. And the detailed description of the workshops is already available on our website, but we'll also go through them soon after our keynotes. So for those who are following our social media channels today, please use hashtag equity in education as you tweet or post about this event today. Our handle is @wise_tweets and @USC Rossier. So we always like to know more about the audience who is following us. So I would like to ask you first, where are you joining us from? And what is your role in education system? You're gonna see the polling questions popping up right now. So what region are you located in? If you can answer those questions, it will be very nice to hear where you're tuning in from. And I see here on the chat that we have a quite diverse pool of attendees from the Caribbean, from Madrid, from California. So it's from Doha. So it's very exciting to see people tuning in from different parts of the world. We'll come back with the answers to the poll in a bit. And in the meantime, I'll introduce you to the topic of the event today. We're gonna focus on how to use crisis as opportunity to enact more equitable policies and practices. And this is something that requires collective action from different segments of the civil society. So to introduce you to the theme and the goals of the conference today, I would like to welcome Dr. Amina Hussain, WISE Director of Programs and Chief Curator, for our opening remarks. Amina, welcome.
Thank you, Aurelio. Good afternoon from Doha and Assalamu alaikum. A warm welcome for our speakers, guests, and participants who are joining us from across the globe. Welcome to day 1 of this unique and exciting collaboration between USC, Rossier School of Education, and WISE. As Aurelio mentioned, my name is Amina Hussain. I'm the Director of Programs and Chief Curator at WISE. And I'm also a proud alumna of Rossier's Global Education Doctorate Program. I'm honored to be here with you all today. This event was sparked by the long-standing relationship between our two organizations. USC Rossier considers the broader education landscape in Qatar a fertile ground for innovation education, and WISE as a classroom grounds for its global education doctorate program for a number of years now, preceding the pandemic. And now we are happy that together we bring this community of educators and education leaders, all of you who are passionate about education and contribute in the realm of education, to examine global education policy responses to the pandemic and emergent solutions stemming from innovative policy solutions, pedagogy, and use of technology. We will be discussing insights on equity amidst disruption through a range of interactive workshops led by Rossier's doctorate students, fostering dialogue amongst participants. Our theme, titled Moving Forward, Rebuilding a More Just and Equitable Education Future, points to the opportunity before us in the present moment to think deeply and creatively about changes that are needed to help education systems emerge from the crises stronger than before. Current disruptions are exacerbating long-standing inequities. This calls for new policies and practices that can increase access and outcomes for all. The current turmoil is also revealing new insights and possibilities about how education might operate differently. This opens the door for bold and innovative ideas about what ways to improve the education experience of every student. In day one, we will focus on using crisis as an opportunity to enact more equitable policies and practices. A crisis alone is not enough to bring about needed changes in education. Instead, there must be leaders who understand what is happening, leaders who are able to develop plans, and leaders who are ready to build support to implement new ideas. Given the disproportionate effects of crises on poorer students, it is also important to focus on policies and practices designed to help our most marginalized learners. I also encourage you to join us tomorrow as we focus the discussion on fostering innovation to build more just and equitable education systems. The current crisis has required educational systems and the communities within them to be creative and agile in response to dramatic change. They have, in many ways, risen to the challenge, but much work remains. Towards the end of my speech, I would like to leave you with 3 C's that I hope would be guiding values for you during the discussions today and tomorrow. Number 1 is courage. Let us just be open to new ideas and solutions, new different ways of being, think out of the box, and challenge each other. Let us dare to be open to new possibilities. I believe courage is what you do when you do not know. And of course, courage breeds agility. Number 2 is commitment. Commit by being present, by sharing your ideas, and by taking the discussion forward beyond the forum. Number 3 is collaboration. We are all united by our passion for education. Let us collaborate beyond boundaries. Together, we can bring hope to the realm of education after it has been struck by the tsunami of COVID-19. I would like to leave you with 2 quotes. As Helen Keller said, alone we can do so little. Together, we can do so much. And the chairperson of Qatar Foundation, who's also the chairperson of WISE, Her Highness Sheikha Moza Nasser, said, there is an intellectual world consensus, which you are all a part of, that says education is a treasury for all solutions. So let's use it. I wish you all a fruitful and enjoyable discussion. And Aurelio, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Amina. Thank you so much for this great introduction. And now I would like to invite Pedro Nogueira, Dean of USC Rossier School of Education, for a keynote speech. Dean Nogueira is a sociologist, and his research focuses on the ways schools are influenced by social and economic conditions, and also by demographic trends in local, regional, and global contexts. He has authored several books and appears on US media outlets as a regular commentator on educational issues. Dean Nogueira, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you, Aurelio, and greetings from Los Angeles. It's such a pleasure to be with you. I'm going to share my screen so I can share some slides, and I'm looking forward to the opportunity to participate with you in this important conference. So let me start by saying I want to ask you all to think a bit about how we can use the pandemic, which has already taken such a toll on our countries throughout the world, an economic toll, but also a deeply personal toll, because we know that many individuals have been affected by the isolation, by being cut off, and the consequence of this will be long-term. But as disruptive as this has been, I think it would be a mistake if we merely thought about returning to normal, returning to the way it was, because the path we were on was not sustainable. And all the evidence suggests that if we continued simply in the way we had been, that the world and many nations throughout the world were in deep trouble. So the challenge I think we face is, how do we use education as a tool, as a resource for creating a better and more just world? And this is a question I've been thinking a lot about during this pandemic. And so I want to start by reminding all of us, because all of us are in one way or another involved with education, that every problem facing the world today can be thought of as one that can be solved or at least addressed through learning. Think about that for a moment. It is the human capacity to learn, to think. And I want to add, Amina talked about 3 C's. Courage, collaboration, and I can't remember the third C she offered. I want to add a 4th, and that is creativity. It is our ability as human beings to create that allows us not only to survive, but to modify our circumstances so that human beings can continue to survive in the world. And so even before the pandemic, we were faced with a global refugee crisis. The estimate was that over 10 billion people across the world would be moving because of war, because of climate change, and because of violence in their countries. That problem may have slowed down now, though not entirely, but it's likely to increase again. How do we address this issue? Because it's not going away. Secondly, what about the young people who are also part of this massive wave of human migration, who often end up in our countries without their families and without the resources needed to adapt? And then there's the rising inequality in the United States. Even as we've seen some companies and individuals grow wealthy during the pandemic, we've seen others fall through the cracks, losing their homes, experiencing food insecurity. And this has been one of the richest countries in the world. In many other countries, the problems are far worse. So I want you to think for a moment what role education can play in countering xenophobia, inequality, and even more importantly, hopelessness. What role could education play in supporting democracy and human rights? So last night, I was reading an article about Greta Thunberg, and many of you know of her. She's the young woman who's captured our world's attention because she's spoken out so clearly about the threat posed by climate change. And this one article, she reminds us, she said, I am not a scientist. I'm not the one who understands the threat. What I have done is simply speak clearly about the threat to future generations. And she's posed a question. She says that, well, millions of people have moved to action, but how do you move millions more to take action against climate change? And she says, part of what we have to do is to stop pretending that we can simply adapt to a worsening situation, because we know very well that millions of people can't adapt. They're already dying. And that if we don't take concerted action now, we will face a future that is even more bleak. I want you to think about that, because I think that there's a tendency to not recognize that we have greater ability to respond to our challenges than we realize sometimes. And education is one of the ways in which we can, in fact, respond. So one thing we've known for many years, if you want to reduce poverty in the world, then you have to find ways to educate young women and girls. And why is educating young women and girls so important? Because we know that when women earn more money, they spend their money on their families, on their children. So you lift an entire family out of poverty. And we also know that when women are educated, they have fewer children. And teen pregnancy is linked to the perpetuation of poverty. And then most importantly, we know that in most households, the mother is the first teacher. And so when we educate women and girls, we actually pass the benefits of that education on to the children. This might seem to be a simple problem, but we know that in many countries, women and girls are not provided access. How do we change that? How do we start to use education as a resource that can help us to solve problems like the education of women, knowing very well that in many countries, our educational systems reflect the inequality present in our societies. So we have to begin to plan for a different kind of education, an education that is equitable with respect to access and opportunity, that is holistic, and by that I mean it doesn't simply focus on academic needs, but also acknowledges the social, the physical, and the emotional needs of our students, because they're all connected. An education that is stimulating and engaging and that taps into the creativity and problem-solving ability of students, and an education that empowers students as lifelong learners so that they can confront the problems we face, not with fear, but with courage and intelligence. This, I believe, is the great challenge of education, and I know from my own experience that it is already working. I work with this school that you see featured here, PS28 in New York City. We number our schools. This school is located in Bedford-Stuyvesant, a very poor community, and it had the highest literacy scores in the city. And the question was why? And when I visited the school, what I learned is that the principal, who's featured here in this article, described her school not as simply a school, but a community center, a center that served not just the academic needs of its students, but its community needs. And they had partnerships with a local hospital, and they had partnerships with a local youth development organization, because they knew that if they were going to serve a population that included many homeless children, they would have to figure out how to build support systems for the entire community. Over 50 parents a day volunteer at this school. And they do everything from helping children to go to the bathroom, to make copies for teachers, to help children who need support in reading. And when I asked this principal why you have decided to build these partnerships and why do you involve parents in these ways, she said, because I knew that no help was coming to my school. We had to find ways to help ourselves. I saw the same thing when I visited Massachusetts several years ago and visited Brockton High School, the largest high school in the state, in a city that is depressed, known for its homelessness, its crime, and other problems. But it's now known for having a great high school. A great high school because despite the fact that it is large and that most of the kids are poor and from immigrant backgrounds, they decided that they would meet the needs of their students by ensuring that every teacher could develop their literacy skills. Whether they taught math or art or physical education, every teacher is a teacher of literacy. And because of that, the school now is seen as a national model of what's possible. They didn't sit around and blame poverty. They didn't sit around and blame the lower schools that serve their students. They asked, what could they do to meet those needs? By reframing the questions, I believe we can create new opportunities through education that can allow it to be used as a resource for change and as a vehicle for creating a more just and hopeful world. I saw this also in the Bronx, New York. This school, the Bronx Academy of Language Technology, serves students with interrupted formal education. That is, these are children who did not attend school regularly in their native country. So when they arrive in the United States, they are illiterate in their native language and in English. Despite their needs, over 95% of these kids will graduate from high school ready for college. And again, it's because how they have organized themselves to meet the needs of their students. When I asked the students, what makes a school like this so successful? They said it's because it's like a family. We look out for each other. We take care of each other. When I asked the teachers, what makes it possible for your schools to be so successful? It says, because we collaborate. Every teacher plans their lessons collectively, and no lesson is given to a student until it has been vetted by their colleagues. And a new teacher turned to me and said, don't all teachers teach this way? And I said, well, sadly, no. Many teachers work in isolation. And he said, if I didn't work with my colleagues, I wouldn't be able to do this. I share these examples because they remind us of what is possible if we have the creativity and the vision to recognize that education can, in fact, be a way to secure a better future for ourselves and for our children who are following. I want to encourage you to use this conference over the next few days, again, to begin to think about what needs to change in education. Are we willing to truly empower our children so that they can become agents for change, who don't merely adapt to the circumstances they find themselves in, but who can think critically, who can problem solve, and who can imagine new possibilities? And that's why we have to tap into their creativity. We have to build a strong sense of community and social capital, because it's not simply about individual efforts. Individual efforts are important, but we need collective agency. We need to work together in order to solve the great challenges that we face. I became an educator several years ago because I saw those possibilities working with young children. And I imagine that's true for many of you. Now I want to encourage you to use this time together to reflect on your work and to ask, how can we make our curriculum relevant to the challenges facing our nations, our societies, and the world, so that we can, in fact, prepare young people to approach the challenges that we face, not with fear, but with courage that's rooted in an ability to solve problems facing humankind. I want to close with this. My colleague, Sir Ken Robinson, good friend, passed away during the beginning of the pandemic. And Sir Ken Robinson often said, the real problem with education is that we're preparing children for a world that no longer exists. We're still using 19th century strategies for a 21st century world. And what he encouraged us to do was to not be afraid to unleash the imagination of children. Children are naturally creative. Schools must build on that creativity, must nurture their curiosity, and must empower them to use their talents to solve the problems we face. I want to encourage you to be willing to take that on, because the world is looking for solutions. I believe they lie not in government, but in schools. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dean Aguirre, for your insights. And indeed, as you said, education should address inequality, should enable more justice, and as you rightly pointed out, also create hope. And I'm convinced that the stories that you just shared will inspire the educators here today with us to be creative and build this collective hope in their own communities. So now, following your call for action, we are all going to have the opportunity to interact with educational leaders who are part of the Rossier's EDD student body and brainstorm collective solutions for the challenges that Dean Aguirre just described. So to introduce us to the workshops, I would like to welcome Rob Philbeck, Professor of Clinical Education at Rossier School of Education. Rob, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Aurelio. And thank you as well to Dean Pedro Noguera for those inspiring words. Let me also welcome and thank each of you, our participants today, who are joining from all around the world. We're so grateful for your attendance at this symposium, and your presence and your involvement today are what will make these important conversations possible. So thank you. So it's now my pleasure to introduce the workshop segment of our agenda. We're very excited about this. Of course, following these workshops, we will of course return to this room, as you've heard, to hear a second inspiring keynote by Selma Morea on policies for racial equality in education. I know you will not want to miss that. And let me remind you, as Aurelio said, that you'll need your link that you got used to originally get into the room when you registered. So please identify that and have that ready. But for the next hour, we will be working in smaller groups in different Zoom rooms for our workshops. We will all transition to those Zoom rooms in a moment, but first let me just say a few words about the workshops today. First, your workshop facilitators are all active professionals from around the world. Each is associated with the USC Rossier School of Education's Global Executive Doctoral Education Program, either as a current student or graduate. Most importantly, however, all of these facilitators are engaged in one form or another in the work of making education more effective and more equitable. The workshops that these leaders have designed are meant to create a collaborative space to rethink the future of education together. Whichever workshop you select, you can expect it to be engaging and interactive. Each workshop will raise your curiosity, invite you to give your input based on your experience and your expertise, and provide opportunities for meaningful discussions with other workshop participants. If we could have the slide of titles now. Each workshop, as you'll see, will address a variety of topics critical to our global education communities in this current moment. These include things like thinking about the role of implicit bias and how it affects policy, how we can incorporate more accessibility features for our students with disabilities, or how we can shape teacher development for the post-COVID world. What does it mean to create new strategies to engage our youngest learners online? And what can we learn from China's education response to COVID-19, given their massive digital transformation? What about higher education policies and what it means for higher education institutions to prepare students for with new employability skills to succeed in the post-COVID world? Also, what does it mean for higher education practitioners and instructors to change their practices for a virtual era? And then finally, this crisis has disrupted admissions processes all around the world. So what does it mean to use this moment as a policy window to make changes in admission practices? I encourage you to review the titles now on the slide and decide which workshop that you would like to attend. We will ask you shortly in a moment to select one and move to that room and then fully engage in that one workshop, staying for its duration. Whichever workshop you select, you'll be asked to think about the topic as it relates to your own context. You will be involved in discussing new strategies or possible solutions and identifying takeaways with the other participants in that workshop. Shortly, you'll be asked to click on the link provided for the workshop that you'd like to attend. But let me just give you a couple of more instructions to make these workshops most successful. Because each workshop is designed with everyone's participation in mind, please be ready to give input using the chat box, by responding to polls or other tools that are used. Also, you can expect a carefully designed activity or two that will allow you to directly converse with participants. So be ready to talk about your own experience and ideas. And finally, to make these types of interactions possible, please be ready to have your camera on if you are able. And while you will want to mute your mic generally when not talking, be prepared to unmute your audio so you can have the opportunity to say something when that arises. Okay, so with that, I think we are ready to get started. I look forward to seeing everyone back in this room, in the main room, after an hour with new skills, strategies, and actions to take away. But now I will turn it back over to Aurelio to help us move into the workshop rooms.
Thank you so much, Rob, for this introduction. And please, as you might see now already on the chat function here or there, click on the links of the workshops that you'd like to attend. Remember, as Rob mentioned, please do keep the original link to the main session so you can come back for the final keynotes of the day, right? So you can just go and click in one of the links and join the dedicated rooms. I see now most of participants already doing so and leaving the main room. So yes, we will resume again in about 1 hour, right, for the final keynote. Yes. And I see some people asking here on the chat to send the links again. So we're reposting all links once again, so you can have them. All right. They're also available on our website. And again, you have the description of all titles here on the slide. So you can select the one that fits more your interest, your experience. And as Rob said, I do encourage everyone to participate, to be engaging, to share inputs, to have their camera on, be ready to be really hands-on, right? So thank you so much, and looking forward to seeing you again in 1 hour. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Welcome back. I hope you had insightful conversations in the breakout rooms, in your workshops. I hope that you learn new insights and interact with educators from different places and different backgrounds. I also hope you have acquired new tools that will help you to shape, influence, and implement new education policies that can help to address inequality in your own city, in your own context. So we're still waiting for everyone to come back from the workshop rooms into the main room now. So in the meantime, I would like to share with you the results of the polls that we ran earlier at the beginning of the conference. We asked everyone where you were connecting from. So I'm very excited that we have a very global representation today. About a third of the audience comes from North America, over 20% from Middle East and North Africa, then 20% from Europe, then we've got Sub-Saharan Africa, then South Asia and East Asia. I remember seeing highs from Rebecca from the US, from Abby from Uganda, from Jawad from Palestine, from Sonia from Spain, Kevin from Shanghai. So thank you all for joining. And then we asked you as well in which sector you worked. So not surprisingly, education is the key sector among our audience. But more specifically, we've got a high number of people who work in elementary and secondary school. They're 25% of the audience. And then after elementary and secondary school, we've got post-secondary education. They're 23% of the audience. We had a participant, Desi, who was joining from Indonesia, a master's student studying public policy. So thank you for joining. We had Maria, a teacher from Greece, who said that innovation was now an opportunity to break the barriers such as COVID. So we hope that the workshops have helped you and the other participants to brainstorm on some solutions that can be applied in your education setting. And finally, we asked the following question: who is more likely, right, to push changes, to drive changes for policy in your context? And surprisingly, government was the main response, even though government is not the majority of the audience. We only have 8% of government officials today, but most people in the audience believe that government is the key driver for policy change. And then we have educators next with 25%. So I don't know if you agree with the results. Feel free to comment on the chat. If you have additional comments, we'll be happy to share them with the rest of the audience. And please do share that on our social media as well, using the hashtag equity in education as you tweet. And our handle on Twitter is @wise_tweets and @USC Rossier. Before we resume with our closing keynote, I would like to remind everyone that the call for applications for the WISE Awards is open until December 20th. So let's watch just a short video to learn more about this initiative that spots and celebrates innovative projects in education globally. So if you can play the video now.
Are you working on an education project that is transforming people's lives? Is it benefiting your community? Is it a model that can inspire others? Each year, the WISE Awards celebrate 6 groundbreaking education projects for their excellence and share them with the world. Apply for the 2021 WISE Awards. WISE, an initiative of Qatar Foundation.
So I do encourage everyone here to apply and spread the word in your communities about the awards. So we still have 1 more minute. We're still waiting for some participants to come back. They were all hopefully still wrapping up the brainstorming and the takeaways from the workshop. So I see that, yes, we have most people coming back again to the main room. That's very exciting. And please do participate and share your thoughts on social media, again, on Twitter, @wise_tweets and @USC Rossier. So now, I would like to welcome our next keynote speaker, Selma Moreira. Selma is the executive director of Baobab, the first and only fund, dedicated exclusively to the promotion of racial equity for the Black population in Brazil. She's also a member of the advisory boards of the Coca-Cola Institute in Brazil, of Greenpeace Brazil General Assembly, and of the Institute for the Development of Social Investment. So, Selma, we are very excited to listen to your remarks, and please, I'll welcome you on stage. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. So, hello everyone. On behalf of Baobab Fund for Racial Equity, I really appreciate the opportunity to discuss the challenges of education and racial equity in Brazil. Even though the Black population in Brazil is around 56%, it's highly unfortunate to announce to you that we still face a high level of inequalities at all levels and in every aspect of life. Education, healthcare, housing, employment, and other social rights are basically inaccessible for Blacks in Brazil. A quick look at the issues of racism in Brazil and its impact on the education of youth people. Let's take a look at numbers. Almost 10 out of every 100 Black people over the age of 15 cannot read nor write properly. The illiteracy rate is 3 times higher in Blacks than in whites. 76 of white young people between 15 and 70 years old are enrolled in high school. Among Blacks, this number drops to 62%. 55.8% of white people complete the basic education circle. Among Blacks, the number drops to 4.3%. Education is one of the priority areas of social investment from Baobab Fund for Racial Equity. together with economic development, living with dignity, communication, and memory. Baobá is currently the only Brazilian fund exclusively dedicated to challenge the promoting racial equity. This year, even in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, the Baobá Fund launched a call in partnership with Citibank Foundation to help young Brazilians from the outskirts of São Paulo, the largest city in the country, to reach higher education. The final list of 100 young people chosen will be announced in December. The program includes not only costs of studies to preparatory courses for the college applications and the expenses with transportations and food throughout the program, which will last for the 12 months from March 2021, the year in which Baobá Fund will complete 10 years of activities. But it also includes activities aimed to tackling the psychosocial effects of racism and expanding social, emotional, and vocational skills, including mentoring programs. And all these details that we are addressing on this call will help to understand the challenges of education for racial equity, which are proportional to its importance. Without access to education, Black people will not have social mobility. We need to take in account numerous levels of inequality, difference of access, difference of quality, difference in education content, difference in treatment. Although education in Brazil is a right guaranteed by our constitution, in practice, it is denied due to different factors of social vulnerability that affects more the Black population. Our country has made an enormous effort to expand its school structure in recent decades, notably in elementary school. But the distribution of school is still unequal. As the last school census shows, there are still rural areas without school establishment in some levels of education. Even in large cities, access is different for those who live in peripheries or slum. In Rio de Janeiro, in relation to middle-class neighborhoods, this geography of inequality means that hundreds of children and young people across Brazil have to travel enormous distance to get to school. Only the difference of access to school presents a universe of opportunities for those who work with Black philanthropy and education. And this universe is expanded by the countless opportunities to improve existing schools. I don't mean only physical structures, although there are many schools that need improvements to their walls, roofs, and desks. I speak of libraries, for example. I invite everyone at this moment to think for a brief moment how much we can benefit children and young people from all over Brazil by investing in more diverse and inclusive libraries. And if thanks to internet, we are here today connected, the same does not happen yet with a significant portion of students. Only 1/3 of Brazilians' rural public schools have computers with internet access, and almost half do not have even a computer. Face-to-face education camouflages this inequity, but the pandemic has made it explicit and has caused some sectors of government to see the urgency to overcome digital exclusion, opening space to partnership between philanthropic institutions that are already dedicated to this issue. And this is an important point to reflect on. What is our capacity to attract our partners to cause of education for racial equity? Another point of intersection is the issue of hunger. As several studies indicate, without good nutrition, cognitive development is impaired, which is why school meals are fundamental part of public schools in Brazil. But even before the pandemic, the issue of hunger was already present in our country. Official government data indicates that 10.3 million people lived in situation of food insecurity in Brazil. This situation worsened with the pandemic, motivating companies and people to donate time and resources to alleviate the situation. In a moment of so many polarization, these issues that affect more Black and vulnerable people can not only generate synergies between organizations in the philanthropic field, but also generate a movement to unity within the nation. Having said so, what I would like to point out is that there are numerous entries points to act in education for racial equity. And that several of these doors also lead to issues that are on the radar of organizations that do not necessarily have racial equity as a focus, but they can contributing according to the last philanthropic census conducted by Institute and Business Foundation. Although education accounts for 75% of projects and programs, promotion of race inequity figures only 14 of them. A closer look at racial bias justifies, for example, promoting actions and programs for the age group in which young people already enter adulthood as a response to dropout funnel that is thinner here. It was this funnel that led us to aim at the age group between 17 and 25 years old in our most recent call of education for racial equity. This is a period when which a young person can ascend to higher education or be forced to drop out of schools to look for some type of paid activities among other factors. The Baobab has been establishing programs that seek to reverse that situation. The JAE program with which I started this speech is a form of reversal when it seeks to integrate young people who are in a situation of inequality. It adds up so that these numbers decrease, but increasing the numbers of young people in university, we increase the chance of seeing Black people in better jobs opportunities. This will help to break a paradigm that has long existed in Brazil, the difference average household income per capita. In 2018, Black people received half of what was received by white people. However, our reach is limited. Government initiatives are essential, and we also need more people, more companies, more foundations, institutes, and philanthropic funds to join this type of action. By reducing the barriers for an inclusive action, we will have more references with Black scientists, Black lawyers, Black teachers, more Black people telling their own story. Today, Black kids are still exposed to a pedagogy of racism in our school, which tell the story of our country from an Eurocentric perspective, that is, from a point of view of the colonizer. The various Black heroes and Black heroines of Brazilian history are superficially mentioned, hardly when they are. Our young people leave school without understanding the whole of Black movement in the fight for our rights. Although Brazil has a law which makes the teaching of African culture and history mandatory, this is still not a practice in many educational establishments. If it is through education that stereotype and discriminatory images of Black population are perpetuated, it is through education that we can look back to our past to build our future. When we take on the challenge of education for equity, We take on the challenge of recognizing the importance of Black people for the formation of Brazilian population. We take on the challenge of removing the minority label from our people, a label that defines common sense, since we are more than half the country's population. We take on challenge that is fundamental not only for Blacks, but for the whole society, or rather for the whole world. The challenge of teaching and learning that racial justice and equality is crucial for our best societies. The first experience of racism that take place in school make children grow up experiencing violence, which potentially favors at least the acceptance of violence as natural condition of the world when they are adults. How will the kids project a peaceful future if they live in a hostile environment? Investing in inclusive education is a way to take this challenge of building positive identities and democratic environments where all stories of Black, Indigenous people, migrants are respected. This narrative is extremely damaging to the Black child's self-esteem. If I do not appear in the history except as an enslaved being, if every model presented to me is negative, how can I build a positive self-image? How am I going to project a future in which I am to be subject of my story? The official narrative of Brazilian history is corrosive to Blacks and Indigenous people. In Baobab Fund, we strongly believe in an equitable society, and we are working hard to engage more leaders and organizations with us. Let's together change it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Selma, for your insights. And basically, we asked this question on the survey, who is more likely to drive policy change? And you're basically saying that it's governments with the private sector, with educators, the whole civil society. So we should have the box all the above, right? And I hope initiatives like yours do inspire leaders from other communities in other contexts, in other countries as well, so they can also bring together a coalition that help to address racial inequality. So thank you so much, Selma. Finally, to summarize the takeaways of the workshops, I would like to invite Mark Powell Robinson, Chair of the Global Executive Doctor of Education Program of the USC Rossier School of Education, to close the day and share some takeaways. And in the meantime, I would like to invite you to continue the conversation online, and of course, join us tomorrow on the second and final day of this event. Mark, over to you.
Great. Well, thank you, Aurelio. So my task is to wrap up our time together today and to synthesize across what we've heard. You know, this event began just under 2 hours ago, but we've actually had about 10 hours of content because of the 8 different workshops that occurred. And so I hope to, in this synthesis, to give you a sense of some of the takeaways, some of the learnings from those workshops, and tie them back together to what we've heard in the plenaries. As you know, when we began today, Dr. Amina Hussein spoke about 3 C's: courage, commitment, and collaboration. And then Dean Pedro Nogueira added a 4th C, creativity, to that. And I think that those really are overarching themes or meta-level themes across what we've heard both in the plenaries and in the workshops. Policy, of course, has been our theme, and we had the poll that really, I thought, focused on both government and educators themselves as playing critical roles in shaping the policy decisions that need to be made to adapt to the post-pandemic environment. So starting with what Dean Nogueira said, you know, he emphasized our need, our agency that we have as educators. He talked about the world needing solutions and our perhaps even unique ability to provide them, because those solutions are so often found in schools and in universities. And the need to acknowledge change and harness it, when he was talking about Greta Thunberg and her environmental activism. But that same notion that we can't just figure that we can continue to adapt as things change. We need to revolutionize, think very differently about what we can do and how to go about doing it. And so we saw those same themes in the workshops themselves. And so looking at those and thinking across them, here are several different things to think about. One of the workshops really focused in on the ways in which the pandemic exacerbates existing inequalities in society. And that really was a theme both in the keynote we just heard from Selma Morera and from Pedro Noguera, the idea that our education systems reflect the inequities in our societies themselves, and we need to understand those and recognize them, and then be very purposeful in how we transcend them. And that also came out in the workshops. We also have this shared experience as educators and educational leaders of having to rapidly transform what we do and how we deliver it to our students at all ages. That process of rapid transformation began in China, or occurred earliest in China, but really it's a shared experience across the world now. And there are opportunities in that. So how do we harness that shared experience to learn from one another and figure out what works best and implement it? Another one of the workshops, one of the main takeaways was the need to gather the widest possible variety of stakeholders and engage them in our policy discussions. How do we include not just the people and organizations that one usually sees in those discussions, but everyone involved? And again, this shared experience of learners of all ages, educators and school leaders and government officials. How do we find a way to really get their voices heard together in the same conversations as we're thinking about how to make and adapt policy? Now, another takeaway from one of the workshops is the need to really deeply understand the needs of these learners of all ages. And so one of the workshops focused on very early childhood learners and all the way through different levels of primary and secondary schooling to university level education. And so the need to really understand the needs of each learner and how they can be met, given the different tools we have and given the constraints that we labor against. One of the sessions focused on disabilities, and this question of the various abilities and needs of the learner being a centerpiece is vital and comes out of that session. And as we think about policy going forward, trying to find ways to disrupt and change the inequities in the experiences of the learner that again come back to our societies and the ways that our societies are built. But how do we then as educators, as educational leaders, as policymakers, disrupt those changes to make sure that the people who have been so marginalized in the past and in the present are included robustly in the future? There are a lot of virtual online tools that were discussed in the different workshops, including for very young learners, that offer a lot of opportunity in a lot of different ways in different societies with different kinds of access, but to really think about how we can use those to teach differently and to reach people differently. And that goes back to that idea of the need to not just think in terms of incremental change or adaptation, but perhaps to really think about how we can fundamentally do things differently. And then one of the workshops, one of the discussion points was what needs to be a focus of our education at various levels going forward. And a couple of the big themes were resilience and creativity, that these are things that every learner at each level of education is going to need in their toolkit. They're going to have to be really fundamental things that people have and can use going forward. So that idea of resilience and creativity. Now that really leads in well to what we'll do together tomorrow. Today's focus was on policy. And tomorrow's focus is on innovation. Tomorrow's session is called Fostering Innovation to Build a More Just and Equitable Education System. And that focus on how we can foster creativity, how we can harness new tools, new technologies, new pedagogical approaches, I think will build really nicely on what we learned in our sessions today. We'll also tomorrow have 2 other keynotes from Musimbi Kanyoro and Nafisa Babu. And again, it'll have the same format with a plenary and then 8 workshops from which you can choose, and then a closing plenary. So I just have 2 more things to say. One is that you know, if you enjoyed your workshop today, but you wish you could have gone to the other 7, we are going to work to turn around a publication with the takeaways from each of these sessions in much greater detail than I was able to convey in these remarks. And so look for that in the future. It'll include today and tomorrow's material. And I also just want to thank our colleagues at WISE, Dr. Amina Hussein and her team, Aurelio, Audrey, with whom we've worked, of course, Dean Noguera and Selma Morea for her excellent keynote speech at the back end of this session. So we thank you all for attending, and we very much look forward to seeing you in 22 hours for the second of our 2 days in this online gathering and set of workshops. Thank you, everybody.